So have you heard of the new Fort Solis game? Looking to buy? Let's establish the basics. Fort Solis is a third-person sci-fi thriller set on the Solis planum of Mars and an isolated mining post, starring Roger Clark and Troy Baker. It certainly looks like it has potential to have a dramatic story. At Summer Games Fest, Troy Baker said that the project was described to him as the moon meets Dead Space. He states, when we initially discussed the project, we wanted to create something more in the vein of Duncan Jones' Moon. And by that, I mean psychological aspects of the game where the character's motivations or their perception of reality itself is challenged. So we combine that with the isolated, industrial style of Dead Space. Fort Solis is a story-based game that's inspired by games like Detroit Become Human, God of War, and Until Dawn. They wanted to look at the narrative techniques that were used in those games really successfully, but also add elements of gameplay. And they wanted to keep it one cut. No edits through the entire game, so the immersion level would be super immersive throughout the whole experience. They felt third person is far better for that. Fort Solis will be a one-shot single experience from beginning to end, much like the recent God of War games. So it's going to be interesting to see how the action transitions from one scene to the other without using any traditional cuts. That single shot will take you through the long, lonely corridors that make up Fort Solis's labyrinthine facility. The fort itself is made up of 9 individual sections, each of which has 1 or 2 levels below ground. Those sub-level locations are linked by a network of tunnels which can be unnerving to navigate, and are where the game's Dead Space influences will likely be more clearly felt. But for anyone freaked out by those dark corridors, there is another option. You can walk between sectors across the brighter surface of Mars, but that open air comes with its own challenges. On the surface, we have the dust storm that progressively gets worse throughout the chapters. And if you're on the surface, your field of vision is getting much more limited, especially by the end of the game. You might not be able to see 3 feet in front of you. Yes, Fort Solis has multiple endings based off of branching pathways. They wanted to make their really big moments have really decisive outcomes. Every big moment should change the characters in some way, have some kind of effect on them. There's a cost to these actions, so they thought it would be cool to up the ante throughout the game, leading up to the final scene. Roger Clark plays protagonist Jack Leary. Fallen Leaf wanted Clark on the basis of his incredible performance as Arthur in Red Dead Redemption 2, which was a showcase for his motion capture skills. At the start of the story, Jack has answered an alarm call from Fort Solis. He thinks it's a system malfunction. He needs to go and see if the systems are okay. As events transpire, he realizes that it's not a malfunction. But later stages will allow you to swap characters with your companion Jessica, portrayed as Julia Brown. Jessica and Jack's dynamic is particularly inspired by the central pairing of Henry and Delilah in the game Firewatch. But unlike Firewatch's Delilah, Jessica becomes a much more immediate presence in the game. They have a chit-chat system between the two, a lot of banter going back and forth, and then later in the game she becomes playable in certain segments. Finally, there's Troy Baker, the third and final headline in Fort Solis. Wyatt Taylor, Troy's character, is probably the most complex, and probably the biggest character in the game. He goes to quite a few different vulnerable states. You explore Fort Solis by controlling Jack, an engineer who has responded to an alert in Fort Solis. And since Jack is not a soldier, he does not have any access to weapons. Instead, the most important piece of equipment Jack has is his multi-tool. The multi-tool is essentially like a wrist device that contains all kinds of alerts that helps interactions throughout the game. They wanted you to feel like you're an engineer, not some super soldier. So the multi-tool has a lot of different functions. The first protocol is it serves as a data bank for all audio logs, message logs, and they also have video logs in the game. So any content discovered or found in the game is then instantly accessible from the multi-tool. Beyond that, it serves as a tool for doing mini-games, like hacking doors, or surging a lock, or powering the LTV, or going into the engine of the LTV, and basically analyzing what parts of the engines are broken, things like that. It has a different use depending on where you are, and they try to actively make each location have multiple uses for it. As a narrative-style game, Fort Solis does not have much combat encounters, in the way a traditional shooter or action game does. but they do have a lot of moments where you can choose to punch. And again, this is harkening back to something like Supermassive. If you choose to want to be more aggressive in that moment, that's okay, they have an animation for that, and that might lead you down a very different path. If you choose to be calm and just want to see where the moment goes, that might take you down a different path. The choice is still the player's, and they wanted to enforce the player's choice. They didn't want you to just do a QTE where the result would almost be formulaic. Coming to the gameplay front, the moment-to-moment gameplay of Fort Solis revolves around exploring many different environments as you search for the answers to your questions and get to the bottom of what actually happened to the station crew. There's a wide variety of environments available to you to explore, ranging from the sandstorm-striking surface of Mars to the many cramped-up interiors and corridors found in the indoor facility. Exploration on the surface is largely done through a Mako-like space vehicle, and getting around Mars will progressively get difficult as the storm continues to worsen as you make your way through the story. The indoors, on the other hand, provide a different kind of transversal challenge, where you must solve different kinds of puzzles to gain access to locked areas and move on with the story. One of the more interesting things about Fort Solis' approach to exploration is that all areas are technically open to be explored from the get-go. Sure, there's going to be a critical path that will guide you through it all, but the only thing stopping you from accessing the late game areas are locked doors. Now, Jack is not a soldier, but that doesn't mean he won't get into a bit of violent trouble. Fallen Leaf calls the more cinematic set pieces in Fort Solis key sequences, and has designed them to go one step further than the action scenes of some other interactive fiction games. Video logs can be quite expressive and can sometimes be quite haunting as well. Fort Solis will be coming out on PC and PS5 on August 22nd. Fort Solis is a highly atmospheric game, and it's all brought to life in a beautiful manner, thanks to the power of Unreal Engine 5. Everything from carefully rendered character models to the imaginative environments and impressive lighting implementation. And it all comes together to create a highly evocative world that would most likely be a joy to explore. So tell me, are you planning on buying Fort Solis? There'll be a link down below if you want to check it out. Make sure to subscribe. AK out.